The London Assembly now plans to reduce diesel vehicles and improve air quality will fail unless more is done to increase the number of electric car charge points in the capital. That is a warning from the Institute of the Motor Industry. It says while the UK has seen a rapid rise in low-emission vehicles over the last 12 months, in London there is still just one charge point for every 6 that is needed. Well, Steve Nash is the Chief Executive of the IMI. Good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Good to see you.
It seems ludicrous. Who is responsible then when it comes to installing these charge points? Why have we got so few?
Well, I think as far as London's concerned, it's a London issue. It's also a national issue. I mean, so we have the figures are a lot worse nationally. It's a sort of 16 to 1 nationally, and that doesn't sound that bad actually. But when you think about it, this is not like a petrol pump. You're not on it for a few minutes and moving off to let somebody else on. In fact, one of the Sunday papers was talking about the problem in London of people parking on them all day. You know, and so it. And I think the perception is really, really important, because if people are going to make the, pardon the pun, but the switch to electric or hybrid vehicles, they need to feel that things like the range anxiety are being dealt with. You know, the reality is, I mean, most people's daily commute is less than 20 miles, so even a fully electric vehicle can do that 3 or 4 days without charge, you know, but it's one of the reasons we know that people quote for not buying one. Yeah. I mean, we saw the sales of electric and hybrid vehicles go up 50% in the last year, but the charging network has grown by 16%.
So it's not, the infrastructure hasn't kept up. It's interesting because actually at one point electric vehicles were almost laughed off. Now that statistic you quoted there, that 40%, almost 50% figure,
yes,
would suggest there has been a shift in attitude in terms of how people view these vehicles. They are realistically considering them as cars.
Well, look, if you think about where we are with diesel vehicles, I mean, if you're in the purchase cycle at the moment, realistically, you're going to think, well, do I actually, if I'm going to be in this car for the next 2 or 3 years, and all of the mood music around diesels is negative, isn't it? You know, whether that's reasonable or not is a whole other debate. But you know, if you think you're going to be penalised, you know, stopped from going into certain parts of the town and so on, people have got to make another decision, and they're starting to look at electric vehicles. Plus, you know, the number of vehicles in the market now, the array of vehicles is much, much better. You've had Volvo announcing this week that from 2019 they'll only make electric and hybrid vehicles. You've had the French government saying by 2040 they don't want any petrol or diesel cars on the road. You know, so our government have said they want us to be at the forefront of this. They see a premium to our economy of about 51 billion by 2030 if we really get on the front foot. And, you know, if you look at what we contribute to Formula One, for example, you know the ingenuity is here. Got domestic manufacturers and so on, but we need to do more. And a couple of the key things that we see as blockages, one is obviously the charging network. I mean, they've got a budget of about 600 million to spend to help this forward, and some of that they've dedicated to the charging network, but they need to speed that up. The other thing is, another blockage is the fact that right now there's about 190,000 people who are engaged in servicing and repairing cars. Only 1% of them are qualified to work safely on the high voltage electrics.
So there's just not enough engineers out there and people able to fix these cars if they break down.
Yeah, well, we've been campaigning with the government to introduce licensing, because these, I mean, a typical passenger car could have, you know, carried sort of 600 volts. A heavy vehicle could be up to 1,000 volts, and that's dangerous to work on if you don't know what you're doing. But we're saying at the same time, most of that 1% work for manufacturers, dealers, and if you want a truly competitive market, the government need to invest some of that money in helping people get trained, because at the moment you could pay up to 50% more to insure one of these cars than a comparable petrol or diesel car, and that's because the insurance industry just look and say there aren't enough people around to repair them, and these are sort of the sort of things, that blockages that can be taken out of the way to turn what is a bit of a wave into a tide. Yeah. You know,
it seems like the powers that be are very keen to say we really want this to happen, but they're not really perhaps doing enough to make sure it happens. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think there's a great statement of intent by the British government, but you know, we're saying we want to be a leading economy. Well, we're nowhere near in the same position as the Nordic countries are, for example, or, you know, I've already mentioned what France have said, and so we need to. There's a new bill that's about to go through Parliament called the Automated Electric Vehicles Bill, and it replaces a bill that was brought forward in the last Parliament, but which kind of it's now been focused in on this technology, and it's really important that goes through quickly, and that we start to see the sort of investments made that help people to be confident that, you know, there's no reason why people can't, somebody who's been driving a diesel, there's no reason why they couldn't buy a plug-in hybrid, because you know, the range anxiety isn't there. They're a practical alternative, and there are a lot of advantages. I mean, there are subsidies to buying them. You aren't going to pay road tax. You aren't going to pay congestion charge, and you know, so there are lots of advantages. And if you're a company car driver, the tax you'll pay on it is way lower than on a petrol or a diesel. Yeah. So.
Steve, good to get your thoughts. We are out of time, but you know, interesting points made there, and you know, just this idea of 1% of those engineers able to actually deal with these cars if they break down is starting it as in itself. That is Steve Nash there from the Institute of the Motor Industry with some of those statistics in that new report today, which says unless we take a big step forward, we will not tackle the issues of certainly air quality here in the capital. Now, let's just stay with motoring issues. London.